Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this conversation with Gretchen Wilson-Prangley, the CEO and co-founder of Play Africa. I'm delighted that you're here and delighted that you've joined us, and delighted, Gretchen, that you've made the time to speak with me. Play Africa is the first interactive children's play and early education museum of its kind in Southern Africa. It is catalyzing innovations in holistic learning, children's rights, and parent engagement and social cohesion, and delighted to talk about all of those things with Gretchen today. Gretchen, first though, I would like to start with your own biography. You were in radio not too long ago, so I'm curious to know how it came about that you founded a children's museum.
Well, thank you. And thanks again for having me. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation and how it unfolds. So I moved to Johannesburg in 2004 to work as a journalist and was working predominantly for US public radio programs, including Marketplace and The World, as well as a lot of print outlets and some UN news agencies. And I did that because I really wanted to come to this part of the world and cover the stories of how people were navigating in a global economy, and a lot of the untold stories about the continent. We really knew that there must be more than a one-dimensional story about Africa. So I really wanted to come and help find and share those stories. But one thing I really discovered in that journey was just the critical importance. One thing I could see straight away when I covered across South Africa for these news agencies was just the ongoing inequalities that were deeply entrenched, first under colonialism and then under apartheid. And even though I had moved here 10 years after apartheid had officially ended, I saw this wide gulf in terms of opportunity for children. And then when I ended up having my own children, my own young children, I think one thing that happened to me, I think happens to a lot of people in the early education space, which is that they start to discover how incredibly brilliant children are and how fast their learning is happening on a daily basis. Their development is a miracle. And I think it's really an extraordinary thing to witness. And when I saw just how fundamental that early years is for children and started to research and learn more about how these first few years are so critical in children's later development, I started kind of putting two and two together and realizing there needed to be some kind of systems-wide intervention. And I thought that maybe I had some skills to bring to bear towards that.
Wonderful. So Play Africa is a physical museum, just to be clear with folks, physical museum, Constitution Hill in Johannesburg. Y'all have dealt with COVID, and we want to talk more about how you have done that. You've adapted marvelously. But tell us first, in sort of a pre-COVID world, if I were to come to the museum, what would I have discovered?
In a pre-COVID world, you'd find us at Johannesburg's Constitution Hill. And that's actually a former prison and military complex that's been transformed and reimagined in recent years as a human rights precinct. So it's literally a former old prison, kind of deteriorating walls and crumbling kind of infrastructure that was really a place that was holding, political prisoners who were making stands against apartheid. Our location is based in something called the Old Fort in this living museum. And we're located just about 15 meters from where Nelson Mandela was incarcerated when he was detained in this prison. And so you would come to Constitution Hill and wind your way through this military complex and discover, as you turn around a corner, bunting and banners lining the courtyards and lots of extraordinary, colorful play equipment for children. And really, we've reimagined the space as a site not of oppression or humiliation or detention, but really of liberation and freedom for children to freely imagine a future for themselves and to freely explore and discover and play with their parents or their educators. So we do this in a quite agile way. So we have some indoor spaces and then some exterior spaces in the courtyards. And those courtyard spaces before COVID, we'd have to set up for about an hour every morning, and our team would then pack it away back inside every afternoon. And so that was kind of our 5-day-a-week schedule. In addition, Play Africa also exists in communities. So using this kind of lean and agile model, we partner with communities to bring Play Africa to where children are. So if transport and other barriers in terms of spatial inequalities exist, we try to go to where children are and take our experiences to children there. So that was kind of our pre-COVID setup.
And I believe that Play Africa is the first museum of its kind in Southern Africa. What is the Children's Museum landscape in Southern Africa, and where does Play Africa fit in? And what's
Yeah.
the case that you would make for more children's museums and for more investment in children's museums and accessibility of those museums to maybe, far-flung populations, rural populations, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Well, the case that I'd make is the case that I'm making every day. So I'm happy to share that with you just now. But in terms of the landscape that we're in here, we do have a large science museum here in Johannesburg that is really aimed and focused predominantly on high school learners. It's a partnership and kind of an initiative of the provincial government Department of Education. And that is really focused mostly on science and technology. And so we are friendly and partners with them in different capacities, but we really are carving out a unique niche here in South Africa and in Southern Africa of creating a public shared space where children and families and schools can come together for shared and equitable learning experiences. And so this is a very unique concept in our context where education systems tend to remain quite segregated, both geographically, but also in practical terms. It is very uncommon for cultural institutions to be designed for children to come together for shared learning. And so that is something that's very unique in our context, and I think that's very pioneering about our work. There are other places that we would say also try to serve a certain kind of niche for children. So those would be parks, those would be family-friendly restaurants that have some play areas. There would be beachfronts or other public shared spaces. And increasingly, we're trying to help transform those spaces as well in terms of really making a difference in terms of catalyzing more child-friendly cities and communities, and doing so in a way that's equitable and creates shared value, not just for children, because we know that when we invest in children, we actually improve community spaces for everyone. So that's a little bit about the landscape, but we are very unique here in our context. And for the first few years of our existence, we realized that when we started to use the term museums, people's eyes would glaze over as soon as we started to mention that. Now we're using museum in the term that we mean that we're looking for a public space that anyone can enter, that is freely accessible to anyone off the street to become inspired, to open their mind, to access big ideas. And that's what we're doing for children in a child appropriate way. But when most people hear museums in our context here, they're thinking about museums about preserving certain kinds of history, certain kind of legacies, oftentimes linked to colonialism and apartheid. And these are histories that are widely unequal. And those are things that we're not looking to preserve or to memorialize in the way that sometimes people associate with museums. Sometimes we describe to people that we're a museum about Africa's future. We're a museum about hands-on experiential learning. We're a museum about bringing people together versus, keeping people apart. So that's a little bit about how we describe it. In terms of our value proposition for this kind of space, it obviously depends on the kinds of audience that I'm speaking to, but we really believe passionately that every child is curious, capable, and strong, and deserves an equal opportunity to experience world-class learning. And we believe that we have a model that is pretty unique in our context, that's been developed in an African context that is very flexible and can be adapted to many different contexts, whether it be in urban settings or in rural settings. And I think that's something that I'm happy to talk more about if you're interested.
Yeah, I love the notion of the notion of a museum of the future, a more museum for the future, a museum of the future. That's really a compelling notion. But it sounds like the physical space of the museum was important, and so now I'm curious to turn to things locked down. A year ago today, it was that the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. And so I'm curious to hear how you all have used technology and design thinking to make a very nimble and quick transition to serve kids in South Africa, despite not being able to host them in the physical space that you described as really so important to the museum.
Exactly. We're a museum that if you had asked me a year and a day ago, I would have said we are an experiential, hands-on learning center that brings children and families together for these shared collaborative experiences. That is what we did. And we knew that we were not technologically savvy in the way that we would want to be to produce world-class content. I think we pride ourselves on our programs and our exhibits as being truly exceptional and one of a kind in our context here in South Africa. And we take a lot of pride in the excellence that we create, and do so with an audience that is, broadly speaking, coming from traditionally underserved communities. So when COVID hit, we had to really take a moment. We didn't stop running. I think in one way, in some senses, we packed up everything at our space at Constitution Hill, trying to clean it and make sure that it would be available, sterilized by the time we reopened, not knowing that we'd be here a year from now. And we then went home, and I sent my team home, and I said, okay, tomorrow, let's maybe start creating some cell phone videos. We knew that we were going to be locked down in our homes, and South Africa actually had one of the strictest lockdown regulations in the world, where we couldn't actually leave our house for 5 weeks. We couldn't even go for a walk outside or walk our dogs. We were literally in the four walls of our home. And so I said, what can we do as a team? Our team lives in the communities that we serve. Could we create some video content? And over the next couple of days, we'd have these morning and afternoon check-ins and send each other some videos that were, absolutely rubbish in terms of quality. And we started to realize, this is much harder than we had thought, and feeling a little bit despondent, like how we were going to make this happen. And at one point, one of my team members, who is an extraordinary team member, said to me, maybe I just don't have the skills that you need right now. Maybe you need to find someone else. And maybe I should, maybe I can't survive this with you. And, I said, okay, let's take a break. And I think it was really at that time that we started to think about how we would answer this question of what to do. And we drew on the knowledge of what we've been doing with children, which is teaching them this process called design thinking. And this design thinking process or approach to problem solving really is about starting with empathy and taking children and introducing them to the idea that anyone can be an inventor and an innovator, and taking them through this process of using empathy to define the problem and to ideate new solutions, and then to prototype and test some new solutions to the new situation. And that's just what we decided that we would do as a team. So we ended up kind of taking our own medicine and following our own process that we teach children to start with empathy. So I basically empowered my team to say, pick up your cell phones in your home. We're all at home now. Let's call through our audience and see what they really need right now. So our audience is made up typically of families in the inner city of Johannesburg, families in outlying peri-urban areas, as well as families who are refugees and families with children with disabilities. That's really where we focus a lot of our outreach. Whilst we're open to everyone, that's really where we invest a lot of our time in building relationships and doing the outreach to communities. So we started picking up the phone and calling parents. And most parents, no matter whether they lived in Soweto or in a wealthy suburb like Sandton here in Johannesburg, said a lot of the same things, which is that they felt isolated, they felt nervous, they felt fearful about what this would mean for their own jobs and their own trajectory, what it would mean for the economy of their family, and whether they'd be able to put food on the table. There was a real sense of uncertainty, anxiety, and stress at that time, as you can recall. And I'm sure the families across the United States felt something quite similar. So we started to think, okay, this is the way that people are feeling. And it was really a moment when we had a phone call with a woman named Erica, who lived in Soweto with her 2 sons, one of whom has autism. And she told us that she lived in a backyard shack where she shared a yard with a house in front. And she said that, she'd been, as soon as we called her, my colleague Mpo called her, she burst into tears and she said, I haven't spoken to anyone in 10 days. We haven't been able to leave our house because my son is terrified of the dog in the yard. And I thought the world had forgotten about us. And I didn't know if I'd ever speak to another adult again. And I think that that call for all of us as a team really exemplified the isolation that we were hearing from parents across the city, that we were all in these homes feeling this deep sense of uncertainty and isolation. So we started to think, based on what we were hearing from parents, what do people really need? They didn't really need what we thought they needed in the beginning, which was videos about how to engage and play with your children, modeling different kinds of play for different age groups, STEM-based learning, science experiments on video. We realized that actually there are incredible resources like that already on the internet. And what people didn't have was a chance to talk about very live conversations with parents that are just like them, facing some of the same challenges. And that's really what we realized we had to offer. So we quickly schooled up on learning how to use Facebook Live and started to take some of these kinds of conversations with experts that we could bring together who volunteered to join us for conversations, kind of like we're doing now. And we started broadcasting these conversations to Facebook Live. And these were conversations like supporting your child's emotional well-being, self-care for parents, parenting children with disabilities during lockdown, or parenting in the inner city of Johannesburg during lockdown. And suddenly what we were realizing is that this was really hitting a sweet spot for parents who felt this incredible anxiety about what to do with their small children and how their future was going to unfold. And they were tuning in droves for these conversations, really resonating with the live content. We then started doing a lot of other programs, which I can speak about, but one of them that was most exciting at the time and continued to grow in terms of excitement was our African storytelling program. So before COVID, we'd have children come to us at Constitution Hill at Play Africa and come for storytelling times on a weekly basis. And, we would get a couple dozen kids and their families. And what we found in taking the same content digital while our storyteller was at home in Soweto using her cell phone, she would be able to reach audiences not only in Soweto or across Johannesburg, but across South Africa, and increasingly more and more in other neighboring countries, across Europe and North America and Latin America and Asia. So at one point we realized we had 4 people commenting from different continents at the same time in our Facebook Live broadcast, while we had never left our house. So we realized that, the way that digital could start to really break down those geographic barriers and to some extent socioeconomic barriers as well. So I think that really helped unlock for us an entirely new future.
That's really very compelling and beautiful. Thank you for sharing. So some back in person now, have you been able to come back in person in any way?
Yes. Yeah, so we have done some different kinds of in-person activities. We started doing those really mostly in October when we were the host in South Africa for something called the Science Film Festival, which is a global science film festival. And our focus in this time is to really work with young children, introducing them to short videos about scientific topics, and then introducing them to a lot of different science experiments. And for a lot of the kids that we work with, this is the first time they've ever done a science experiment and been told that that's what they're doing. So we decided that because of the nature of our experience, we couldn't host it again at Constitution Hill and bring large crowds. So we ended up doing this quite innovative thing of partnering with housing companies that manage high-rise, high-density apartment complexes in the inner city. And we brought the film festival to these apartment complexes where we could host rooftop science experiments and screen in a shaded area the films to create a kind of a socially distant but safe way to introduce hands-on learning for these children. So that was a really successful program that we're really proud of. Another thing that we did is we launched a program that was inspired by that very first phone call. We started realizing how much psychosocial support is so critical at this time in mental health of our parents and their children. And so we really segued from those online live conversations to a program that was much more intensive and guided by global frameworks like the frameworks and guidance that we got from UNICEF, UNESCO, the World Health Organization, INEE, IASC, and different kinds of bodies that are advising about how to support mental health in crisis, and how non-professional folks like us can empower our teams and train our teams to provide very basic check-in services and help refer people to professional help. And so our Heal and Connect program has done that, working with about 5,000 parents over the last several months. And we've done that through one-on-one phone calls. We used a lot of phone call technology, basically very simple, direct cell phone calls, where we worked with partner organizations. We worked with 43 partner organizations and reached out to those who wanted to hear from us with a check-in call to ask how they were doing, and then used simple like apps like WhatsApp and other messaging apps to be able to forward them information about how to seek professional help, how to engage with play in their children, mental health for children, normalizing conversations about mental health, anxiety, stress, depression, and then effectively modeling play and how they can engage with play with their children, and how play can be such an important way to build those parent-child bonds, and also to support children's mental health overall. So that those things, that has been very, very digital, but there has been a demand from a lot of the parents that we work with, especially in informal settlements and communities that are extremely underprivileged, where they really wanted in-person sessions, especially as the numbers were lower here at that time. So we did have a lot of in-person parent support groups. We hosted 15 parent support groups that served more than 650 parents. In doing so, we were able to model, conversations on vital connections between parents and children, self-care for parents, and model play workshops about how to use the play parcels that we distributed to them and engage with children through play. So
I think
does that help answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm noticing in the way in which you just answered that question, right, is that the importance of social connection for parents, right, with one another, with institutions, that there was a sense of loneliness and disconnection that you all stepped in to help fill. And I think it's interesting because I don't know that most people would assume that a museum, right, would step in to fill that role in a crisis like this. But you seem to have done so effectively. And so at Capita, we're very interested and very concerned with how do we reweave our social fabric to support not only children, but the caregivers, the parents in a child's life. And we probably don't think enough about the role of a museum. So could you just talk about that, about the role of a museum and the role of a cultural institution? It's not a school. It's not an early childhood center. Families are probably engaging with it more sporadically than they would engage with a school or a childcare center where they may go on a daily basis. So what is the role of a museum like Play Africa in ensuring a vital society that supports the well-being of our children and families?
I think that we're reimagining the role of the Children's Museum around the world right now. And I think about my colleagues across the United States, but also around the world, who are doing incredible work, serving different kinds of needs of communities in which they're based. Some children's museums have done wonderful things where they are partnering with food banks to just take away the stigma and shame of showing up at a food bank to collect food for their families. Children's museums have stepped in to be a location where parents can collect those services. Some children's museums are doing food gardens and other kinds of ways to actually grow food for communities. And then still other children's museums are doing really interesting partnerships, like the Children's Museum of Tacoma, partnering with a local military base and thinking about ways to bring children's museums into different spaces. The Children's Museum of Chicago, I just read, is doing a really interesting partnership with a local hotel chain to really bring children's museum experiences in other ways into other shared spaces where families might be. So I think that we're really looking at incredible ways in which children's museums, not just in South Africa, but around the world, are stepping in to fill this space. I hear from children's museums really across the United States in which they become safe spaces, spaces where families can come and be seen, heard, and valued, and that their children can be seen, heard, and valued in a different way than they would be maybe at the local school or other service centers. And I think that that's because we at children's museums as a whole really try to embed this idea of welcoming, inclusion, a non-judgmental space for parents. So what you won't typically find at a children's museum is people giving very direct parenting advice or trying to use shame or humiliation for a parent to make them behave in a certain way. Instead, I find that what I've been inspired with about children's museums around the world is that they're spaces that model new ways of thinking and being with your children and as educators and as parents. I feel like every time I go to a children's museum anywhere around the world, I always learn something as a parent and how I can more creatively and playfully engage with my own child. And I believe that that's something that's really powerful about these spaces, that they are welcoming and inviting to really serve the needs of the community around them. In our case, I think in South Africa, we're quite uniquely positioned for a couple of reasons. One is we lack the social safety nets that many other countries in the global north might have. And so the role of a museum is, I think, naturally going to be a little different because of the needs of the communities in which we work. And I think that drives a certain kind of entrepreneurialism and agility in terms of our quick response as well. Another thing that I think is really critical here is because we work with families who are oftentimes on the margins of our society, we try to model what it looks like to be a fully inclusive cultural institution. And as I mentioned, a lot of the families that we work with are migrants or refugees, children with disabilities, children who are underexposed to or not invited to occupy more wealthy and privileged spaces in our society here in South Africa, places that have been historically, through the law under apartheid, denied to the majority of children. So by trying to use disruptive innovation to completely blow that apart and to say, what would a truly inclusive cultural institution look like for children that would welcome all children, regardless of ability or background, that kind of defines who we are and what we're trying to do. And so therefore, what we find is that the role that we play for a lot of families is that we're the friendliest institution that they know. You know, when they go into a hospital, they might get shouted at or asked to leave. When they go to a police station, they might be given in messages that they're explicitly not welcome to file a claim or to report a crime. When they go to a school, they might be told that your child is not welcome here because of their disability, their inability to pay, or their refugee status. So what we're trying to do is try to completely disrupt that whole way of being and show a different way of inclusion and to show people how they feel. So what we find in where we are based at Constitution Hill, which is in its own incredible museum, people come to us and say, you know, in this former prison, they say, this is the freest place my child's ever been, or I feel so safe here. And that's a kind of institution that we want to create no matter where we are, whether we're at Constitution Hill, in a community center, on a rooftop, on the street corner, or in a flagship children's museum.
So your location at Constitution Hill is very interesting to me because it seems to be that by having a very inclusive institution, cultural institution located there now, there's an opportunity to, in a sense, maybe heal memories of what that place stood for previously. And so I'm interested to hear from you about how you think about the role of the museum in that particular place to either heal memories or to also help the people who are coming to the museum and experiencing something very inclusive to remember that which was very exclusive.
Yes. I think what you've described is you've used beautiful words, Joe. Thank you. And I think that there's so much relevance, I think, within a US context as so many communities are reckoning with spaces that have painful memories and histories. I think one of the things that you mentioned is that it can be very profoundly beautiful and symbolic and moving to turn the corner of this prison and to see the play, connection, and joy that is happening within this space that was once a place of detention. The location that we're located in at Constitution Hill was the biggest section that we had was a space where prisoners were brought out to do exercise. And you can see the remnants of the toilet blocks that were kept open so that people would have to use the toilets in public as a humiliation kind of component. This is memorialized in the space, and the heritage of that space is honored where we are, and we kind of operate in and alongside that. We've had people come to us several times and burst into tears when they see what is happening, because they have their own personal memories of the fear, the pain, and the humiliation of the space. And so it is extremely moving. We have global executives coming to see what we're doing. We have people who are working in South African institutions whose parents were detained here, who find this extremely moving. So in a lot of ways, I think that's very powerful. Again, located just where we are in this particular space of Constitution Hill, which is just next to Nelson Mandela's cell, we walk past his cell to direct people to the toilets block. And so there's this kind of almost quotidian experience, and it's almost it's incredibly humbling that this is where we live and work. The challenge, of course, is that naturally it's an extraordinary location, and it's also not fit for purpose for children's early learning and play in the same way that a fit for purpose building would be. So we do have to set up and break down every day, as I mentioned, as a heritage site, and we do obviously have to kind of try to soften the concrete spaces, and we have to kind of prop certain kinds of doors closed that still hold prison cells so tourists can see like the reality of what was happening there and the devastation of that. But we're trying to kind of occupy and coexist in that space to reimagine and to create a site of healing, as you mentioned. So one of the things that was famously said by prisoners on Robben Island here in South Africa was that the prisoners, the political prisoners who were standing up against apartheid, missed the sound of children's voices more than anything else, or children's laughter. And so when we hear children kind of squealing with the of discovery and of learning, we really think about that quite a lot, just being located outside of Nelson Mandela's prison cell.
And has there been any pushback about the location of Play Africa there? And I'm thinking in terms of having this very joyful, light, freeing experience of play for children in a place of real gravity.
Yes. And I think we hopefully are really trying to ensure that we would never make light or not respect the heritage and the history of the space. I do think that there was sometimes a little bit of confusion in the very beginning where people, I think a lot of times, and I think this is not unique to our context here, that people see young children and they see play and they think, oh, it's a nursery school child minding center, or it's a place, a place that we just kind of, that children can be left and what are they doing here? So when we start to contextualize that for any visitor who has those kinds of questions, we really try to emphasize that we are trying to make manifest the values of the Constitution, which are at the center of Constitution Hill. So that this precinct is also home to the Constitutional Court, which is the Supreme Court of South Africa. And so that's just on the other side of Nelson Mandela's cell, down the hill. So the Constitutional Court being based there is for us extremely symbolic in terms of the way it's been reimagined as a human rights precinct. And we hope that we are contributing to that component of reimagining the future of our country by really making manifest. What does it look like? And I think this is relevant for Capita in particular, but what does it look like when we honor the rights of a baby? What it means is that we create nurturing environments where we can empower parents to be able to provide nurturing care to their child. When we honor the rights of a baby, we help empower those who take care of the baby to understand what that baby needs for its ability to flourish. When we talk about human rights for a child, a toddler, what does that mean? It means that they need to be able to grow and be stimulated in a safe environment where they can access developmentally appropriate materials that are able to stimulate their cognitive, social, physical, and emotional growth. What does it mean when we're talking about human rights for a 5-year-old? Well, we can start to have dialogues about empathy and Ubuntu and kindness and how we like to be treated and how we want to be able to treat others fairly. So a lot of the work around how to build a nation is really embedded alongside the STEAM or the STEM work that we do, the creative arts work that we do. So whether it's talking about racism or Talking About Race program. We have a Children's Voices program where we introduce children who are ages 6 to 10 how to vote, how to engage in a courtroom where everyone is equal under the law. We teach children about the power of making their voices heard with a placard sign, which is something that was very important in South Africa's history, but also in other movements around the world, including the civil rights movement. So we teach this to children at a young age because we're really trying to make manifest. If we're looking at a constitutional democracy where every child is a full and complete citizen from the moment they are born, how do we make cultural institutions that reflect that? And for me, honoring their rights from birth is critical. We also, incidentally, we do a lot of outreach work to clinics as parents are getting prenatal care, because we want them to see that this is a continuum that starts from now going forward, that they can access a rights-based approach in a location that's convenient for them. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot there that I love, and I think in particular the envisioning of the museum as a cultural institution that is recognizing and affirming the full rights of children as citizens from the very beginning of their lives, and forming them in the habits of citizenship. I think there's probably a lot that we could learn across the world when, over the last several years, relevant to the last several years when there's been a lot of commentary about democracy under threat. But I do want to talk about the clinics, because at Capita, we have a strong partnership with Reach Out and Read, an intervention that's focused on early relational health, using the tool of the book and the tools of early literacy in the pediatric clinic. So I'd just love to know more about what you're doing there, and in particular, how do you coach, train, form, intervene, support the providers in pediatrics and child health to support the relationships between children and their families?
Well, that's a great question, and I have to say it's the kind of work that you're doing, and that the kind of conversations that you're having, Joe, that made me so excited to have this conversation, because I think that there's just so much that I'm really loving and respecting about the work that you're doing and the conversations that you're having with people that I deeply respect. And a lot of it comes down to this intersectionality around parent-child relationships, health, development, that cognitive, physical, social, and emotional development of children. That's, for me, about a bigger picture of a society in which children and families flourish, which is exactly what you talk about. So I'm so glad you've asked that question. So I think the work that we've done for parents has been about that outreach component. Sorry, my video is stalled. Are you able to see me?
We can still hear you. Yeah, we can still hear you, and we can see you. It's freezing every few seconds, but nothing that's too distracting.
Okay, great. So thank you. So the work that we've done to reach parents, it's part of our outreach. And I think one thing that probably defines how Play Africa is different than a lot of other children's museums or cultural institutions is the extent to which we reach out to families to let them know who we are, what we do, and that they're welcome. So we have someone who's a dedicated outreach person who lives in an urban inner city area adjacent to Constitution Hill, and she will go into high-rise buildings with unmarked entrances to try to find schools or children's daycares that are located inside of flats with like no windows, like in a very high density space. She'll literally say, she'll identify someone on the street with a new uniform that she's never seen before. And it turns out it's actually an informal school that's just started, and she'll find out where they live, where they go. She'll find out where the school is, and she'll make sure that they know about Play Africa. So that kind of outreach is kind of typifies who we are and what we're about. We're trying to reach audiences that have probably never been invited to participate in a cultural institution in their lives, that have maybe had a journey to get to South Africa that was extremely challenging and dangerous, and we're looking for them to be able to offer them this kind of service. So the work that we've done with clinics and with hospitals and others is part of that same kind of outreach, where we're trying to identify parents who might not otherwise be invited to the kinds of services that someone in a different economic bracket might know about automatically. and be able to, partake in a boutique exhibit, or a boutique experience for their parent-child bonding and things like that. So that is really where it comes down to, is really doing that outreach and doing so. And I love the idea of using books as a tool for that. And there's partners that we work with who have a similar kinds of methodology that we'd like to help amplify as well. So that's really where the clinic work has come in. We've done work in other kinds of hospitals. We've worked with the Nelson Mandela Children's Hospital. So there's lots of different institutions that form that kind of partnership, as well as aftercare facilities, under-resourced daycares, what we call in South Africa day mothers, who are really informal, unregistered spaces where mothers will kind of take on several children at a time in a room while the parents are able to go to work or sleep if they work a night shift. So that's kind of where our outreach extends to, including those clinics.
Very interesting. We're coming towards the end of our conversation with Gretchen. And so if you do have a question that you'd like to put in the chat, please feel free to do that. And I'd love to ask her your question. Gretchen, I'm going to go ahead and ask you a question that we ask towards the end of every Capita conversation. And that is, what is one project you have dreamed of but haven't started yet?
I think the best way to answer that question, Joe, is that we started Play Africa with a vision of a world-class facility that could serve 200,000 visitors a year at a minimum. We know that in Johannesburg, there's 1 million children in our age bracket who deserve the kinds of experiences that we have to offer. So we believed, we started dreaming big and bold from the very beginning. And after a long journey of identifying a particular piece of property, being invited and working with the city of Johannesburg to secure that property and then build a big, beautiful children's museum, along the way, the plans fell through for the property. And suddenly we were left after 18 months feeling like, what was all that for? We have nothing to really show for it. So it really helped us pivot our entire strategy, where we said, let's take a much leaner and more agile approach where we can not be beholden in raising millions of dollars for this facility and get going straight away. And that's the approach that we took, which I think was the right one. But we've never forgotten about the fact that we still believe that if a child anywhere in the world can access a world-class learning institution like a children's museum that we see across the United States and across the world, we believe children in Johannesburg deserve the same kind of opportunities. So we've identified currently a beautiful location, an extraordinary mansion with extensive grounds, with indigenous gardens all over, and we want to buy that property. So that's the project that we have not started yet, because we have not purchased the property yet, but that is exactly what we want to do, because we know that we can turn that into a destination that would serve 5 different provinces. And we know that we could serve 200,000 children there at a minimum, even with what we have currently. So that's what I would say. Alternatively, our digital children's museum.
Yes. So there's a question here that I think is related, and it is around the work that you've done in your city and Soweto and other places. And what is your vision, maybe not just for the Mansion Museum, right, but for pop-up opportunities and going out to communities who may not be able to come to you, right? So how do you think about the museum across the city, across the region of Johannesburg?
That's a fantastic question. When we think about scale, we do a lot of thinking about scaling and scaling different programs, scaling different partnerships, scaling different methodologies and curriculums. So we're doing kind of a lot of different kinds of scaling at the moment. One of those is that we've recently received a special award from something called the Real Play City Challenge, which is a global placemaking award. And we're using that award to start something called a virtual toolkit about child-centered placemaking. So because we'll never be beholden to any single building, whether it's a mansion or Constitution Hill or anything, we are about something much bigger than that. So what we wanted to do with our Real Play City Challenge toolkit is to take our design thinking methodology workshop that we offer to young children and really create ways in which anybody could use the same methodology and resources to replicate that especially within other African urban and municipal contexts. So that's one example of scaling that I think is really exciting. We're going to be launching that toolkit in June. And we hope it to be a real African-centered contribution to this global placemaking conversation about child-friendly cities, and are bringing on board lots of thought leaders across the continent to contribute to that toolkit, which I'm really excited about. There are other ways to scale. I can go on, but I know that there's a couple of Q&As, so I don't.
Yeah, there are a couple of more questions for sure. Let me ask you these. Given your success using digital platforms, do you have any plans to expand the way you model new ways of thinking and being to other countries, with the idea of potentially fostering connections across continents and cultures?
Thank you, and thanks, Nicole, for that question. It's great to hear from you. So yes, absolutely. You know, one of the things that's been extraordinary about our journey is we are a small, lean, agile organization, but we hit so much higher than our weight. So we try. So we've partnered with 13 different universities around the world to think about ways we can connect people around ideas that will really benefit children here in South Africa and across Africa. So one of those ways, as an example, we have done some different family connections, which I'll speak about, but one of the things that we're doing right now, which is very exciting, is a partnership with the Harvard Graduate School of Education's Project Zero, where we have helped them register educators in ECD centers and in primary schools across not just South Africa and 8 provinces across South Africa, but in 4 additional African countries, to get exposed to an online play-based learning micro-practicum. And that includes opportunities for the educators to connect with each other. So we're hearing from these educators that they are loving the international relationships between educator to educator, where someone from Hillbrow here in Johannesburg is connected to someone else in Gaborone, Botswana, and Nairobi, Kenya, and they're sharing ideas about play-based learning with each other and then practicing with children in their care. So that's been an exciting international collaboration that we've loved. And of course, they're connecting with Harvard at the same time. And another thing that we've done in different contexts and different programs, which I won't itemize at length, but we've partnered with the Cole Children's Museum of Greater Chicago to connect children through a program called Art Across Oceans, which was funded by the MacArthur Foundation. This was back in 2016, but it formed the basis of that original idea of, can we create an equitable program between 2 children's museums in which children are exchanging ideas and connecting with each other through technology. So we've hosted conversations for children in Soweto to meet children in Chicago, and in doing so, just have a conversation about their favorite fruit, how they pronounce their name, what languages they speak in school, and other kinds of things. So those have been really amazing. And I think that idea of a digital field trip is like really in order for us. So thanks,
and
Nicole.
Just practically speaking, what technology are you using for that? How are they connecting, and how has this last year of everybody using these technologies to connect with one another, how do you see that perhaps accelerating those opportunities in the future?
Well, I think again that what digital has revealed to us is that it's revealed to us 2 things. It reveals to us, one, the ongoing digital divide that we face here in South Africa. And we came up with a lot of creative ways to get around that as much as possible. Small data packages, different ways of literally talking people through how to download Zoom onto their very low cost smartphone, different ways that we really try to bridge that digital divide to create a human connection. And I can speak about those strategies as well. But I think one of the things that really revealed itself to us is that over the next 5 to 10 years, those digital divides, whilst some will be deeply entrenched, there are going to be a lot of opportunities for expansion of data and technology that we want to be on the forefront of. So we want to be able to be that doorway, a 2-way doorway for children across South Africa and Africa to access through Play Africa the rest of the world, and for people around the world to access what we have to offer here on the continent. We know that it's oftentimes used as a cliche to talk about Africa rising, but we know that Africa is the youngest continent. Almost 60% of children here are under the age of 25 across the continent. This is a space that we want to be able to nurture those kinds of safe, child-protected, child-safeguarded experiences for children to open up their mind, to expand the ideas of possibilities, to imagine a future for themselves and for their families and to be able to almost as in Reggio Emilia methodology, look, have their eyes jump across the fence to see not something else. And that's the portal that we want to build as our digital children's museum. So I think the future is so exciting. Yesterday, I met with someone, a team of people in Seattle to talk about virtual and augmented reality experiences for children here in South Africa. And those are the kinds of partnerships that we're really excited to nurture.
Awesome. Yeah, I was just going to mention augmented reality. I mean, the opportunities that presents for kids to even be in essentially shared classrooms across continents seems really exciting and exciting opportunities ahead. And to your point about Africa Rising as a cliche, it may be a cliche, but it's true, right? And if demographics are destiny, there's really a great future. Not just for Africa, but really the future of the world is going to be much more African over the coming decades than it is going to be European or American. So important for us to stay in touch and to stay connected and to deepen the connections that exist with the countries across Africa. There is a question here too, Gretchen, about how you are informed by the research in child development. How do you stay abreast of it? And I would just add to this question, how do you develop the capacities and the skills with your staff, both on this question of smart, being smart about child development, but also to your earlier point about inclusivity? How do you work with your staff as a leader to ensure that they're also creating the most inclusive place possible for the young children that you all serve?
Thank you for asking that question. I think that a lot of our work, certainly it is informed to some, to as much of a degree as we can by the latest research and thinking around early childhood development and foundation phase learning. We are really deeply rooted in a playful learning methodology and approach, and really want to nurture children's self-directed experiential learning, while also providing opportunities for facilitated programs that get them out of their seat and to imagine different kinds of roles and things. So I think our partnerships do run deep. So we've partnered with the Wits School of Education here in Johannesburg, and done different programs where we bring on emerging teachers to help empower and equip local inner city ECD practitioners, and do so in a way where we are also learning ourselves as a team. I try to stay abreast of research as it's coming out, but that is then also being fed down. Down is not the right term, but fed across our team to be able to share, this is an interesting insight, et cetera. But a lot of what we've tried to nurture and model here at Play Africa is also based on a certain kind of intuition that is rooted in the dignity of the child and the dignity of the parent and the dignity of the educator. So we have an internal phrase at Play Africa that everyone on my team would be able to tell you that our internal mission is that we are people with dignity, serving people with dignity. And when we use that as the premise of our work, it allows everything to flow from that. When we treat every single child and person with dignity, we are able to know how to navigate virtually any really given situation as it arises on the floor or as it arises digitally. So whether it's from child safeguarding and child protection to the way in which we model welcoming a child or a family to our space, it's all rooted in that fundamental idea. And I think I really have to credit my incredible team for taking this and really embedding that and then demonstrating this and modeling that to others. I think one of the things that's really extraordinary about our team is that we're quite small, and half of our team is made up of formerly unemployed youth from outlying areas outside of Johannesburg who had never had a formal job before. And they come to Play Africa for online skills training and development and workplace readiness skills. And yet within a few short months, I believe that because of our team's training of them, they're able to take on greater and greater responsibility and model those values with families and with educators and with children, most importantly. Is that
well, Gretchen,
get at the...
Yes, it sounds like you all are doing really incredible work, both at Constitution Hill, the physical location, and online, and through all sorts of digital connections you have with the people you serve. People with dignity, serving people with dignity. I think I'll take that and use it myself. Thanks so much for your time. Thank you all for joining us today. And we look forward to continuing to watch from a distance, and hopefully once travel is possible again, up close and personal, what Play Africa is doing and the impact that you all are having in the world. Thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.